Not that long ago, I had one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, and I need help figuring out what happened to me. The night it happened started out really good. I spent the night at my girlfriend's house for the first time. I met her through a good friend, and we were really clicking. She lived in a little remodeled bungalow out in the woods near this beautiful lake. We both had a really great time, but the relationship was still new, and I knew I had to be at work early the next day, so I said my goodbyes and started home. It was like 3 a.m. or something. It was the middle of summer and the day had been sweltering, but all the heat of the day had left and the air was sweet and humid. I rode with my windows rolled down and the radio playing the kind of weird stuff that they could only play in the wee hours of the morning. Despite being dead tired, I was feeling pretty great. It was foggy out, probably due to the lake. The road I was on was narrow and full of twists and turns. On each side of the road were these huge pine trees that were so thick and tall you almost couldn't see the sky. There was no moon that I could remember, so I had only my headlights to light up the night. Not quite 5 minutes into my 45-minute drive, I saw the first one. It was a female mannequin, completely nude, standing on the side of the road. It had a dark shoulder-length wig on and bright red lipstick. It was standing with one hand up, almost like it was hitchhiking. Its head was angled just right so that it looked like it was staring at my car as I came toward it. I remember staring at it, frowning at it, but passing it by without much thought. I remember thinking that either some kids left it there as a joke, or that someone dumped it there. It was weird, but I didn't give it much thought. I kept driving, and not 5 minutes later went by another one. The second one was a male mannequin sitting on a large rock on the same side of the road that the last one was on. The mannequin was nude, and its hands were over its face. The way it was sitting, I remember thinking that I didn't know that mannequins could be arranged in that shape. At this point, I decided it was just some teenagers setting up some weird shit up on the roadside in the hopes of freaking people out. I rolled my eyes and kept going. I was expecting the next one, so I wasn't surprised when I saw it. It was two mannequins, exactly the same as the two I had seen before, but this time together. The brunette and blonde male mannequin were together on the side of the road. The man was sitting down with his legs stretched out, and the woman was sitting in his lap, her arms looped around his neck. He was looking up at her, and she seemed to be looking down at him. As my headlights hit them full on, it looked like their heads slowly turned to look at me. That was impossible, but that was what it looked like. My eyes were probably the size of dinner plates as I went by. I was careful not to step on the brake or the gas and glided by. I white-knuckled the steering wheel and tried to tamp down on the panic clawing up my throat. Whatever good feelings I was floating on earlier in the night were completely gone. I kept trying to assure myself that this was the crescendo of the joke that the other two mannequins were setting up. You see the first two and they're weird but normal. And then you see the two together and they have mirrors or something on their heads that make it look like they turn to look at you as you go by. I was congratulating myself on figuring out the trick by the time I saw them again. As I drove forward at a cautious 35 miles per hour, the mannequins appeared in my headlights. My car is old and the headlights have never been replaced. The plastic covering the bulbs is old and dirty, so the yellow light was only able to penetrate the fog and darkness by a couple dozen feet. I had only a few seconds to see them, but this is what I remember. They were both standing there, holding hands in the center of the road. The man had his free hand thrown up over his eyes, and the woman had her hand held out straight in front of her with her palm flat in the universal gesture for stop. That was all I saw before I hit them. I'll admit, I didn't touch the brakes. I was so terrified that once I saw them, I had already decided I wasn't going to stop no matter what. They smacked into my front bumper with a hollow crack. I probably hit them right at the knees. They popped up into the air and over my windshield like hollow plastic dolls. Not people. I remember that distinctly. They flew like they didn't have weight or heft, and the sound as I hit them was definitely of something brittle and tough. Not soft and wet like flesh. They weren't people. I'm absolutely sure. As they went over the top of my car, I turned to look over my shoulder through the rear window to watch them fly back down to the asphalt. Because of that, I didn't have the chance to wrench the wheel as the road came to a sharp turn just past where the mannequins had been standing. My car went down over the edge of the road and into the ditch, the front of my car making a sick crunching sound as it hit the loamy forest floor. I sat in my car totally stunned. My hands were shaking, my breath was coming fast and my head was spinning. I wasn't sure what I had just seen or what had just happened. Once I was able to get my breath under control, I looked in my rearview mirror at the road behind me. I was sort of expecting the mannequins to not be there, for the whole thing to have been a figment of my imagination. But they were there, and they were moving. The man was sitting up, his legs shattered at the knees. The woman was standing on one leg, her other leg shattered almost all the way to the hip. She was reaching down to help the man up. Their movements were jerky and inhuman, like their limbs weren't working all that well. Whatever control I had over my breathing disappeared after that. The car was still running somehow, so I put it in reverse and revved hard. My wheels spun, kicking up turf and mud. I checked my rearview mirror again and saw the mannequins were looking at me. Their blank black eyes watching my wheels spin uselessly against the dirt. I switched the car to drive in a desperate attempt to get out of the ditch, and it worked. My car rocking forward further into the woods. As soon as I was out of the rut I had made, I cut the wheel and reversed again, this time jumping up over the ditch and back onto the road. I looked out my left side window and they were standing there looking at me, the woman now holding the man's body against her own. They didn't make any movement toward me, and I didn't make any motions towards them. I threw my car into drive and drove away from them with all the speed I could manage. I didn't go to work the next day. I had to take my car to the shop since the front was totally crumpled. I made up a lie about hitting a deer to explain the damage. I told my girlfriend the same thing. We ended up breaking up because I couldn't go to her house again. I'm coming to you guys to ask you what I saw. Despite it being late and getting into an accident, I'm sure what I saw was real and not a hallucination or a dream. What were those things? What did they want? I can't drive at night and I'm hardly sleeping. Please help me. I need answers. It was a rainy, gloomy afternoon. I had been hiking for hours and I wasn't sure I knew where I was. It was getting late in the afternoon and I needed to get back or find shelter. I found the latter when I glimpsed a desolate warehouse in the distance. I walked to the back of the building and found an open doorway. As I entered, I noticed bags everywhere. It appeared to be an old food storage facility. I laid down on one of the bags, but it felt odd, almost squishy. I passed it off as old food. Feeling hungry, I decided to look around to see if there was any unspoiled food. I cut open a bag and saw a disembodied head, staring back at me. Startled, I fell backwards into another bag, now recognizing the softness as flesh. I ran back to the door, but it wouldn't budge. I am virtually desensitized to gore thanks to years of gaming, so what really scared me was the lack of an exit. I calmed my nerves and realized that the body parts were fresh. This meant that someone would most likely return, thus opening the door. I hid in a dark corner and waited. I don't know how long I waited. I had turned off my phone to conserve battery. Finally, after what felt like eternity, I heard movement outside. The door swung open and two men dragged in a body. I inched closer to the door, praying they wouldn't close it. They did. I ran back into the corner and waited for them to leave. I watched them as they set the body down on a table and began dismembering it. I looked away, hearing the sound of bones and limbs being sawed through. This went on for a little while, then everything went silent. I looked over as they began bagging the goods. They finished up and started for the door. This was my last chance. I crept up behind them, praying they wouldn't turn around. I made it out and stealthily sprinted away from the building just before they turned around. I had escaped. After some searching, I was able to find my vehicle and make it back into cell range. I quickly called the police about what I had encountered. They were skeptical, however decided they would send an officer out to check up. I was able to guide him to where the warehouse was, but as we stepped inside, everything looked different. There were no bodies, just moldy sacks of potatoes everywhere. I had not had the peace of mind to take any pictures earlier, so I could do nothing more to prove what I had seen. I returned to my home and continued living life. A couple days later, I received an unmarked package in the mail. I tore it open and found a flash drive. Plugging it into my laptop, I found pictures of me in the warehouse. Someone had been in there with me. The last file on the drive was a picture of the table they had used to chop up the bodies. Written on it with blood was my name. I was fearful for my life, but now I had the proof I needed. That wasn't until the drive automatically erased itself. I heard something outside. Peeking outside my kitchen window, I saw the men from the warehouse. I started back to my laptop, but glimpsed one of the men hiding behind the door. I slipped outside without being spotted and ran into the woods. That's where I am now, looking over my shoulder, trying to survive. I've been running for hours. I keep seeing masked men chasing me. It is almost as if they are hurting me somewhere. I feel very dehydrated and I think I'm going insane. I see an open warehouse in the distance. I'm going to try and hide in there to wait them out. Wish me luck. It's true what they say about dogs. They can sense when something's off. The air flexes in a way that rattles them and makes them growl and howl. I never believed such things until I experienced it for myself. I would always take my dog into the abandoned hospital situated in an old waste ground a short walk from my house. Despite being vacant for many years, long before I moved here, it remained mostly unvandalized. No broken glass littering the floor or used needles possibly carrying something infectious. So I saw fit to begin exploring the place with my Labrador. We started going there a few times a week. Max would do his business and then we'd duck in through a busted door in the back and poke around the wards. It was an old hospital, likely awaiting demolition. Deserted when a bigger one was built about an hour down the nearby road. Either way, it was maintained until recently enough that serious decay was yet to rot it to the point of being too condemned to visit. Then one day, Max found a spot in one of the upstairs rooms that he became fixated with. He'd stare at it, head cocked in confusion, growling. When I'd try to move him away, he'd snap at my hand. Something he'd never done before. I'd have to put the leash back on just to get him out of there. I contemplated not returning with him after that started happening, but it was the only place in the depressing industrial district where I lived where I could let him run around without being bothered by other people. So we came back, a decision that changed my life forever. I'd brought a big bottle of white vinegar along with me. My plan was to dump it all over the spots on the floor that Max was so fascinated with. Convinced the dark stain covering the destroyed portion of the floor was just a local hotspot for the area's animals to piss on. So, keeping him on his leash, I led us through the broken door in the rear and up a winding metal staircase to the second floor. Max started whining the second we entered the building. We continued along further down the long hallway until we reached the room, and without a second thought I unscrewed the lid of the vinegar bottle and poured its contents all over the exposed wood flooring and the shattered tile fragments around it. And then, silence. The chirping of birds in the surrounding trees, the wind blowing through the gaps in the windows, everything except the sound of my own breath all gone. An intense dread filled my gut. The air felt thick. I snapped out of my shock as I realized I couldn't hear Max either anymore. I looked down and was horrified to see he was no longer with me. His leash lay by the doorway with the collar still attached. Max? The sound of my voice echoed violently in the dead silence, and I nearly fell to my knees in fear. I slowly approached the empty door frame, picking up my dog's collar and running my thumb over the metal name tag, tears filling my eyes. Max? I called louder into the hallway. This time the force knocked me to the ground and I stumbled into a wall, hitting my head. Just as I was getting to my feet, I heard a whine from somewhere down the hall, contrasting the eerie deafness with its desperate tone. It's Max. It has to be. I crept forward, listening for another sound. Any sound. But all I could hear was my own footsteps and panicked, shallow breathing. As I was nearing the end of the hallway, I heard another high-pitched whine in the room to my left that made me stop in my tracks. Something about it made my stomach drop. It was identical to the last noise I had heard. Not similar. The exact same. I poked my head around the corner into the room through my terror, knowing I had to investigate. It was empty. Just an overturned bed shoved against the far wall and a single chair left haphazardly on its side. Something howled directly into my ear. I spun around, screaming. Max wasn't there. I sprinted out the way I came in and the sound returned to the world around me as I left the hospital grounds. Thankfully, a neighbor recognized my dog later that evening. Max had been wandering close to the highway, seemingly confused, and he brought him back to me. I don't know where he went, but I know he wasn't in that building with me after I poured the vinegar. It's like he vanished into thin air. I'm just so glad I got him back. One thing's for sure now. When Max focuses on one spot for too long, especially when he starts growling, I get us the fuck away from there. Whatever it is. I zipped up my hoodie to shield myself from the chilly October night breeze. The tour group moved along the downtown sidewalk and stopped in front of a barbershop. My Tinder date, who I will refer to as Rebecca, recommended the ghost tour walk. After reading one of the host's mini books about ghost stories and urban legends in Oklahoma, she learned about his guided tours. I have to admit, I was enjoying the tales from Jeff Provine about Norman. Jeff told us that sometimes when people take a photo of the barbershop, a man in a brown overcoat and hat would appear staring back at them. Just about everyone my date included proceeded to pull out their phones and snap their cameras. The group inspected their photos only to have captured nothing. The group moved forward while my date pulled me back for a moment. "You should try with your camera with no one around," she suggested. When we met up for our date, Rebecca thought bringing my Polaroid camera was a fun idea. She also mentioned that she hadn't been out with anyone with such a hobby. I was about to tell her that nothing would happen, but she put on an irresistible smirk that I could not deny. I smiled at her and pulled up my camera. I enjoyed the thoughtful, selective nature of the limited printed photos in a world of unlimited takes. While the tour host talked about the restaurant next door, I snapped a picture of the barbershop. We rejoined the group, letting the photograph develop in my hoodie's pocket. After a few stops, Rebecca asked to see if the barbershop photo had finished developing. I pulled out the picture, and she inspected the image like a person searching for a treasure. "I think you got something here," Rebecca whispered with excitement as she showed me the photo. "That looks like a brown smudge to me," I told her with honesty. "Well, maybe it needs to develop more," she said. I didn't say anything back. She was too cute, and I was enjoying the night. The tour was more informative than scary. We didn't actually go hunting for ghosts, and no one jumped out to scare us. I think the best way to describe the experience was like a walking history tour involving ghosts and murders. I don't want to spoil the tour for anyone, but I wanted to give some backstory on my cursed barbershop photo. After the tour, Rebecca and I went our separate ways. When I got back to my apartment, my roommate was still gone. He was out of town for the weekend visiting family. He was a relatively chill roommate who kept to himself. He let me decorate the dining area, which I did by hanging my Polaroid prints with clothespins and strings all over the room. He thought they added much life to the bland beige walls of the apartment. As I dumped out my belongings on the dining table, I got a text from my date asking me to send her a photo of all the Polaroid pictures from the night. I laid them out on the rustic white table my parents handed down to me when they bought a new one for themselves. Using my phone, I took a picture of the dozen prints. In the process, I took a closer look at the one in front of the barber shop. Where I thought I saw a blemish at first resembled more of the person Jeff described. I sent Rebecca a close-up and a copy of the tour guide too. Rebecca immediately FaceTimed me. "I told you," was the first thing she blurted out to me. "I told you so." Okay, I admitted. Then I thought of a line. "Maybe you should come over and make sure this man in brown doesn't try to kill me." Rebecca laughed. "Maybe I should. You know, to make sure you don't die. Text me your address." I texted her my address, and she said she would be there in about 15 minutes. I proceeded to tidy up the apartment. I cleaned the place before leaving, but I didn't expect her to come here as this was our third date. I started with the kitchen since I was already there. After emptying the dishwasher, I rounded up the prints on the table. As I was picking them up, I noticed the man in brown was in all of the photos. He stood in the exact same position compared to the one in the barber shop. I assured myself, this has to be some exposure glitch. I stacked the photos face down on the coffee table. I decided to worry about them later. I scrambled around the apartment, throwing out trash and cleaning dirty surfaces. I was straightening my bed sheets when I heard the doorbell ring. I rushed to the door. However, when I answered, no one was there. I called out hello, but no one but the wind answered. I questioned my hearing. Did the doorbell ring? I closed the door and checked my phone. There were no new messages from Rebecca, and only 10 minutes had passed since her last text. As I was about to put away my phone, I received a text from Jeff. "Thank you, but I should warn you that those who were able to capture a photo of the man in brown said they were haunted by him until they got rid of the picture." Jeff's message read with a winky face emoji at the end. I chuckled. He was clearly joking around. At least that's what I thought at the time. On my way back, I realized all of tonight's prints had been scattered all over the living room. I proceeded to pick them up, which I figured got blown around from the wind when I opened the door. As I collected the final one, the doorbell rang. There was no mistaking the ring was mine. I put the prints in my back jean pocket and answered the door. The man in brown stood before me with an old straight razor to Rebecca's throat and a hand covering her mouth. Dirt covered his three-piece suit like someone dragged his outfit out of the ground. "I want the photos," the man demanded in a low grumble. His voice sounded rough, like he hadn't spoken in ages. Without hesitation, I handed them over, and he pushed Rebecca onto me during the exchange, causing us to fall backward. As we stood up to shut the door, the man was gone. Rebecca and I ended up staying up all night. Not in the way I had hoped. Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. What a time of year, ain't it? I still remember my first Halloween. My first real Halloween, mind you. Not the manufactured bullshit they shovel down your throats year after year. I'm talking about All Hallows Eve. I'm talking about Samhain. I'm talking about the one night of the year when monsters walk the earth. I was 11 years young when I first experienced the horror of Halloween. I'd been out with a friend, roaming the streets with bags full of wrappers and stomachs full of candy. We'd been out looking for some fun, some excitement. See, once you reach a certain age, plain old trick-or-treating doesn't really do it anymore. No, you need something special. Something terrifying. I think that's why we took a stroll down Blackbriar Lane. I think that's why we went looking for the decrepit one in all his wicked glory. I think that's why I watched somebody die. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? Yes, I suppose that I am. So let's rewind, backtrack. Allow me to set the scene. It's October 31st and the night air is crisp. The leaves are red and gold and the neighborhood is lit up in jack-o'-lanterns and full moons. There's mischief in the air. There's murder. Earlier that week, a kid dies. They find his body floating down the river like he's out for a swim, except he's fully dressed and missing his head. You ever tried to identify a body without a head? Without teeth? Well, apparently it's easy. See, little Greggy Hall had a nice mom, the sort that most of us can only dream of having, and the lovely lady went ahead and stitched his name right into the side of his jacket. Just like that, we know who was dead. Open and shut. Case closed. But what was he doing dead, without his head, floating down the river when he should have been in bed? Was it a prank gone wrong? Maybe the poor kid slipped across the trestle. Or maybe, just maybe, somebody sick and twisted was out for blood. And innocent little Greggy was too good a target to pass up. Who could say? Truth is, nobody had a clue. Not the sheriff, not his mother, not a single soul in town could have told you how little Greggy came to find himself so waterlogged and pale. But here's the thing about secrets. None of them last forever. This one didn't even last a week. It was me and Andy who figured it out, late on Halloween night. We took the turn down Blackbriar Lane because that was the way you made it into Shelton Wood, and that was the place they'd found Greggy Hall's decapitated corpse. Before I go any further, I want you to know that I don't mean Greggy any disrespect. He was a good kid, a kind kid. That night, though, in the heart of October, he had become so much more than that. He'd become a legend, a ghost story come to life. That night, Greggy Hall became the reason I don't celebrate Halloween. That night I crossed Blackbriar Bridge with Andy Delton, and together the two of us walked into Shelton Wood. The trees there are like nowhere else. They're thick, almost so thick that they press in on each other like blades of grass, smothering for space. Once you step beneath the Shelton canopy, it really doesn't matter if the moon is crescent or full as the sun. You're not going to see a damn thing. It's dark in there, desperately so. We use our flashlights to navigate, doing our best not to tear our costumes on the branches as we passed. My mother had spent all month sewing my Dracula outfit, and Andy had saved up half a year's allowance for his Spider-Man get-up. We weren't about to walk out of there full of rips and holes. No way. But we had work to do. See, Andy and I knew something about Shelton that not the sheriff or Greggy's mother or even the pastor knew. We knew that Greggy Hall had been talking about hearing voices in the woods on the way home from school. We knew he'd saw something watching him from the trees. We knew all of this because his sister, Sally, was in our grade, and she told us about how religious their mother was. How fanatical. She told us her mother once convinced the pastor to drag Sally into those woods and perform an exorcism on her. She told us she thought her mother's paranoia was starting to wear off on poor little Greggy. So when Greggy started talking about hearing voices, seeing things, we just thought it was nonsense. Make-believe. After all, he wasn't describing seeing a man, woman, or animal in the trees. He was describing a something. A monster. He was describing seeing a nightmare come to life, and even out here, in this little slice of nowhere on the edge of the map, we knew that monsters weren't real. Or, we thought we did. But then pop goes little Greggy's head, and the next thing you know, we're fast believers. So fast, in fact, that we brought the news straight to the police. Guess what happened then? They chucked our statements into a drawer and told us they'd look into it. First, the damn poster wants to ban access to Shelton Wood, and now kids are saying it's haunted. We heard them laughing all the way up until the door closed behind us. Town full of nut jobs. No, it was up to us. We thought about inviting Greggy's sister along, but we knew she wanted time alone. Time to mourn her brother. That was fine by us. This whole thing, this little investigation of ours was just a scouting mission anyway. We weren't expecting to encounter the creature that stalked Greggy Hall from the trees. We weren't expecting to fight for our lives, but then these things so rarely go according to plan. We spent an hour roaming Shelton before we realized we were lost. We'd been trying to follow the river, but at one point Andy swore he heard muttering coming from over the hill, and so the two of us clambered up to it to investigate. All we found were old pine trees and empty dark. We turned around to circle back, but the river was gone. Vanished. We did our best to retrace our steps. We even followed our noses, hoping we could smell the stink of the town sewage that ran into the river, but it was no use. The river was lost, and so were we. We walked for 10, maybe 15 minutes before the sounds of the forest died. The shifting of branches, the pitter-patter of rodents darting across the dirt, the buzz of mosquitoes, and even the trill of crickets all turned to silence. It was like somebody had hit the switch on a stereo. Instant quiet. Andy and I stopped to listen, to observe, and we saw something shift in the trees. A large figure, maybe twice the size of a man, with round white eyes and a long twisting neck, was perched above us on a thick branch. It clicked at us. At first we thought it was speaking, trying to communicate, but then we realized the clicking wasn't coming from its face. It was coming from its hands. Its fingers, long and crooked, seemed to splinter into separate appendages. On either one of its hands were fans of hundreds of fingers, each gripping the tree branch while their nails picked away at the bark beneath. That picking was making the clicking sound. Its fingers were. Andy tried to speak to it. He tried to ask what it was doing here, to ask whether or not it was the thing that had killed poor little Greggy Hall, as though there were any doubt in our minds. But at that moment, the monster's fingers gripped the branch with such force that the entire thing snapped in two. The creature began plummeting to the earth like a giant, and I thought maybe our work would be done and gravity would put an end to it. But it let loose a shrill shriek and flapped its many-fingered hands like wings, and pressed itself up into the air. It shrieked again, and its eyes, once white and round, became an acid painting of colors, horrible and bright and anguishing. There weren't any reds or purples or greens. There were only the colors of blood, of bruises, of bile. It screeched again and then swooped toward us. My heart thundered as I threw myself to the ground, but the thing, whatever it was, caught Andy in its grip. It caught him by his head, in 2 feet that resembled human jaws more than anything else. They were covered in white teeth, and it was at that moment that I knew I would never see my friend again. And I think he knew too. Andy shook and hollered. He screamed and shouted, but all of it was only for the span of 6 seconds, because not a moment later the thing clenched its jaws, its feet. Andy's head split open like a jack-o'-lantern, his inside splattering me like a water balloon. I had to go. I turned around, full tilt from this thing. I didn't know where I was running. I didn't even know if I could reasonably run anywhere that this monster couldn't reach me. But I knew that I had to try. I had to, because if I didn't, then I would end up just like Andy. Just like Greggy. As my feet pounded the earth, my heart pounded my chest. I ripped off my Dracula cloak, terrified of it tripping me up on an errant rock, and doubled over as my lungs burned. I'd never run so hard in my life. Never so fast. And it wasn't enough. Not even close. With a beat of its finger wings, the beast crashed down in front of me. It towered above me, standing over 9 feet tall with its terrible technicolor eyes, swirling like promises of violence. "Looking for me?" It uttered in such a low, broken voice that I almost missed it. "You killed Greggy," I said. It seemed a stupid, obvious thing to say after watching my best friend's head crack open like an egg yolk. But it was all I could manage. At that moment I was so shocked, so traumatized that I reverted to our hypothesis, our mission. "Who are you?" I asked, swallowing. "Are you him? The decrepit one?" It took a breath, a long, harsh breath that sounded like it might have gurgled razor blades in its lungs. When it spoke, it breathed cold air onto me. "I am you." It took another tooth-filled step, and I staggered backwards. My world spun, but I wasn't sure if that was because of my fear, my grief at losing Andy, or the awful kaleidoscope of horror playing out in its swirling eyes. "What does that mean?" It didn't respond. It reached a hand toward me, and its eyes swirled faster and faster, like a blender of madness, its teeth snapping as it took its next steps. "Polaire!" shouted a voice. The monster recoiled. Its long neck twisted like a snake as its eyes blinked and faded like a television reception dying in the storm. It curled into a ball, wrapping itself with its hundreds of fingers before disappearing into a gust of dead leaves. I took a breath. Above, the moon seemed to glow a little brighter, and beside me the sound of the river returned. Crickets filled the night. The wind whistled in my ears. It was as though the world had come back into focus, and I'd been pulled out of a dream. All because of... Hello? I said, wheeling about. There'd been a voice, a loud one that was commanding and full of authority and speaking a language I didn't understand. But where was... Oh, there he was, down by the river. "You all right, son?" the pastor asked. I shook my head. "No, my friend's dead and..." "Yes, I see what's left of him on your shirt." The pastor paused, looking me over. "What made you go looking for that creature?" "It killed Greggy Hall," I sputtered. "We wanted proof." "No such thing. Not when it comes to the decrepit one. It's closer to a thought than a being of flesh and blood. You can't take pictures of it. Can't record audio. Believe me, I've tried. It feeds off of fear. It feeds off of people like your friend. Like you, who go looking for nightmares in all the right places. If it gets strong enough, we lose." He must have registered the confusion on my face. "By which I mean that we die. This town, you and me, your mother and father and sisters and brothers, all of us fall into its deadly reverie and poof, off goes our heads." "How do we stop it?" "We don't. Or, at least you don't. I do. I brought it here after all, so it only makes sense that I should be the one to risk getting rid of it." "You brought it here?" "Yes. When I performed the exorcism on Sally Hall, it had been living in her, see, hiding. Her mother noticed it, bless her heart, and she requested I remove the being from her daughter, but it was powerful. Too powerful for me to destroy, and so instead I had to compromise. Think quickly." I swallowed, the pieces beginning to line up in my head. "You had to chain it here, didn't you? To this forest?" The pastor nodded. "It was all I could do." He sighed, put an arm around my shoulders, and told me that he'd walk me home. He explained that after what happened to Greggy, he had been petitioning the mayor to block access to Shelton Wood out of respect, to have it marked as a burial ground, a memorial. He told me there had been some pushback at the time. Folks didn't want to sacrifice a slice of forest for a single dead kid, but now that the same fate had befallen Andy, he counted on the mayor changing his tune. And by the next week, the mayor had. The section of Shelton was closed off to everybody but investigators. Soon enough, even they quit coming through. It became a dead zone, a piece of the map that didn't exist anymore, far as anybody was concerned. The simple fact was there were too many bad memories, too many reminders of the horror that had taken place there. It's been years now and I no longer celebrate Halloween. I can't. It reminds me of Andy, of little Greggy, and of the decrepit one with all its fingers. For a while there, I thought I'd actually moved past all of this, left it behind me. But then tonight, I saw something from my window that sent my blood cold. Amidst the shifting clouds of the black Halloween sky, framed in the light of the moon, was a large bird. A bird with 1,000 fingers on either hand, and feet lined with teeth. A bird flying away from Shelton Wood. A bird flying to town. I've worked as an EMS dispatcher in northern Illinois for about a year now. Lately, overtime for us has been killer. When you couple that with a surprisingly high uptick in unpleasant calls, you've got a strong pot of boiling bullshit that would leave anyone contemplating if their life was actually worth living. My shifts were all scheduled to last from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. Lately, with call-offs, I haven't been getting out of the center until 3 a.m. Those 12 hours were filled with nothing but absolute toxicity and depression. And that toxicity didn't just ring out from the phone lines, but also echoed out from fellow coworkers. Within that year alone, I found myself going from an excited new rookie to a steadfastly vile ghoul. I knew things would only get worse as my misery grew. And that's just how I felt after my last 12-hour shift. I gave my relief a brief overview of what happened on my shift before giving a slight wave to everyone else as I left down the exit hallway. The second I reached the heavy exit door and forced it open, I left the familiar blast of freezing cold air hit me. The bitterness of the change always woke me up from the gloomy lullaby that is my job. I braced myself for the cold walk and stepped out into the frigid night air. I had 3 more days left on my shift before I'd be able to enjoy my weekend. I just had to push forward just a little more. I did my best to avoid stepping into the slippery, frosted-over sheets of rainwater that had scattered themselves along the sidewalk outside. I wasn't about to make another person on my crew suffer through another emergency call. While carefully watching my feet, I had caught something out of the corner of my eye. It was near the dimly lit street next to me. I took a gamble and glanced up and didn't see anything at first. But something felt off to me. An extra bite to the wind kept telling me to keep searching until I saw whatever grabbed my attention. So I kept looking. That's when I saw the iced-over bushes start moving. I stopped walking and squinted over to them. What I saw was a small black shadow limping its way from underneath the brush. It was no bigger than a small critter, but for some reason I was drawn to it. It felt like I was entranced to acknowledge its presence. So I did. The critter slowly staggered across the road just in front of me. The second it stepped into the streetlight, I knew exactly what it was. It was a small, black cat hobbling forward. I felt for the little feline. It was just a short-haired Bombay cat. The small litter critter was stuck in the brutal freezing night air and had practically frozen over. I watched her briefly until I noticed another light illuminate its small body silhouetting its figure in my sights. A car was coming straight towards it. I don't know what snapped into my head, but I didn't want to see the injured cat get hit right in front of me. So instinctively I skipped forward on the toes of my feet towards the cat in the road. The driver of the car clearly wasn't looking. Their speed didn't slow for even a fraction of a second. The cat itself looked towards the headlights and froze in place. She was either petrified or just desired to escape from her unfortunate life. As soon as I was within distance to grab the black critter, my shoes hit on an ice patch. I felt my feet leave the pavement underneath me as I tumbled forward. I could hear the sounds of tires kicking up gravel and barreling toward me. Those lights were blinding and only got brighter with each passing second. Well, this is it, I remember thinking as I landed violently on my kneecaps. I tried standing again, but couldn't get any traction. There was only one last thing I could do, which was grab the cat and toss it out of the way of the car. I grabbed the little thing by its scruff and tossed it out towards the sidewalk. She made a soft little meow underneath my grip, but it was the only thing I could think of doing. For me, on the other hand, well, I still couldn't get my footing. I just placed my hands on the back of my head and curled up. I felt my throat tighten until I couldn't breathe. The noise of the engine reached a point that it was blaring inside of my left ear. I felt like I could feel the heat radiating off of it, but then the light disappeared. I still heard the grinding of tires on the pavement, but this time it was traveling further away from me. I opened my eyes in a cold sweat to see the red glowing taillights of the vehicle speeding off in the distance. Somehow I didn't get hit. Somehow that driver must have made the quickest turn that anyone's ever seen. Somehow I was still alive. I felt a sandpapery sensation caress my gloveless hand as I stared out towards the slowly disappearing taillights. I looked down to see the small black cat licking the back of my palm. I don't know if it was the adrenaline or the near-death experience, but I teared up just looking at that small little acknowledgement from my new feline friend. "Hey, girl," I whispered. My voice was just barely audible over the whistling wind that had continued to engulf us. I let my palm gently travel down the fur of my little companion. Its wiry fur bristled with clumps of ice. "What do you say I take you home tonight so you can get warm? We can see about a shelter tomorrow." The cat looked up into my eyes with a dazzling set of icy blue irises illuminated only by the streetlight above us. She blinked slowly at me and I smiled in return. Once I got home, I made a little nest for her using some of my decorative blankets. I wasn't exactly adept at having a pet. I'd never had one before, so I was just doing what I thought I should. "Sorry, girl. I need to get some sleep tonight. I can see what to do with you tomorrow. I hope you're at least not freezing anymore." I smiled down at the feline who had wrapped herself up around my feet. I leaned down to pet her one last time before walking over to my bed. I had to at least try to get in some shut-eye before the sun rose. Within moments of laying down, I felt a small little weight jump on my bed. My body relaxed and I slipped away with a smile on my face. A few hours later, and I heard my front door slam shut. I jolted awake. The sun poured into my bedroom window like a warm cover. I looked around my room and didn't see anyone. I swung my legs off the bed and I slowly crept towards my bedroom door. With a quick peek, I couldn't see anything. With a bit more courage, I searched around the rest of my home and didn't find a single other soul. I suddenly realized that my little companion from the night before was also missing. I took a second look around my home. I clicked my tongue and called out for her, but nothing came up. Well, until I looked closer at my bed. Right where the little feline was sleeping was a golden twinkle. I looked closer to the storage flake of gold. It was an admissions ticket to what looked like a circus. The brim of the golden ticket was lined with swirling black ink that made fantastical shapes at its borders. I picked it up in the palm of my hand and examined it closer. The writing on the ticket read, "1 VIP ticket. Cirque de la Sorcière. Enjoy horror, magic, and terror. Not for the faint of heart. The show starts at 8 p.m. Don't be late." I flipped it over in my hand to see an address and date typed out. It was just 4 days away and a 40-minute drive from my home. I really didn't know what to make of it. Over the course of the next 3 days, my mind kept slipping back to that golden ticket. I looked up the Cirque de la Sorcière online and didn't find anything that stuck out to me. By the time my days off finally arrived, my curiosity was at a boiling point. I needed to see whatever this thing was. Clearly, it was some sort of horror-themed amusement attraction, and horror had always been my favorite genre. At the very worst, I could just do a drive-by and see if it seemed sketchy or not. Maybe even pop inside for a bit and leave if it wasn't for me. Sure enough, at 7 p.m. that night, I had found myself turning on the ignition of my car and ready to go. 40 minutes later, and I was driving down a dirt road off of the main highway. The trees on either side of me lay stripped and bare from the changing of the seasons. Their branches had cast down eerie, shadowy illusions of deathly thin fingers on the road in front of me. I was beginning to think I should turn back. There was something in my gut telling me to leave this whole thing behind me and move on with my life. Just as I felt my foot slowly reach over for the brakes, I saw a massive red glow coming up from just down the road. That must be it, I thought to myself. My foot returned to the gas pedal. I just wanted to take a look after all. What's the harm in that? The image I had in my mind of some small little hick carnival was quickly shattered the closer I got to the vividly crimson, glowing lights that lay before me. A massive white, three-tiered tent stood in protest of the flat land around it. Elegant black swirls ran up the pointed circus tent, mimicking the brim of the ticket that lay in my pocket. Bright neon lights showered the whole clearing in a ghoulishly red glow. The red lights at the top of the Titanic tent formed the words Cirque de la Sorcière. I was awestruck by what I was seeing. Some no-name circus in the middle of nowhere with this amount of care put into it. Not to mention budget. Had to be a magic trick in of itself. The dirt road I had been driving on quickly turned into gravel the closer I got. Dozens of people were waiting outside of a makeshift cast iron gate that had surrounded the tent. A large stone gargoyle faced outwards towards the crowd with greedy, outstretched claws. As I slowly crept forward in my car, I saw the other attendees turn to face me. I felt out of place and couldn't pinpoint it. That wasn't until I saw the parking lot. No one else was parked there except for two large buses decked out in swirling black and red decals. It was pretty clear to me that the others had all ridden here together. Yet, here I was, awkwardly making my way into some sort of group event with a VIP ticket. I parked my car next to the buses. I took a few deep breaths, wondering if I really was going to go through with this, but something about this whole situation captivated me. A horror-themed circus with about 50 attendees resting in the middle of the woods just screamed at my curiosity. I felt drawn to this circus. With one final deep breath, I opened up my car door and stepped out onto the gravel beneath me. The cold air hit me just as strongly as it always did. Before I knew it, I was standing with the others at the gate of the Cirque de la Sorcière. I admired the fencing for a moment. Within the spirals of the black iron were images of skulls, bats, and dancing demons. Every detail was immaculately formed to add to the uneasy delight of the dark and whimsical surroundings. After examining the fence, a man just a little older than me spoke up. "I saw you come driving in. You live close by? My name's Will." He smiled and extended a hand out towards me, and I instinctively reached out to reciprocate. Honestly, I just felt like knowing someone else here would be beneficial in the long run. No one likes to be alone in a place like this. "My name's Riley. It's good to meet you. But yeah, I don't live too far away. Did you guys all get a bus together?" I motioned over to the large circus-styled vehicles that were parked behind us. He glanced over my shoulder and nodded. "Yeah, most of us are from out of state. We don't really know each other. They picked us up at the airport to make it easy for everyone. It was a bit of a long drive out here, but I think we're all pretty excited to see this thing." Just as the last word came out of his mouth, an ear-splitting bell chime rang out from the tent. We all ducked down and cradled our ears. Shortly after our ears stopped ringing, we heard an accented feminine voice blaring out from a loudspeaker. It sounded like she might have been French. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Cirque de la Sorcière. Your darkest fantasies lay inside, but let's see if you're ready to pay the price." with the cast iron gates seemingly came to life. An echoing of grinding metal hinges erupted forth, interrupting the silent anticipation of the crowd. The gargoyle that perched above us growled down in a gravelly voice. Its face now loomed over us with glowing red eyes. A few patrons giggled with each other and snuggled in close to the others in the crowd. I looked over at Will, who had a brilliant smile placed on his face. He looked down towards me and rubbed his hands together to show his excitement. Without even knowing it, I felt myself beaming in response. The feminine voice again echoed over the loudspeaker. Have your tickets ready for the ticket taker. If they aren't in your hands upon your turn in line, he may just happen to charge you for your life instead. With that, a second ring reverberated around the clearing, followed by an echoing, eerie rendition of a funeral march. As we pushed our way through the courtyard in front of the tent, the sounds of cackling and ghastly moans emanated from all sides of us. Decorations of black metallic skeletons, giant cobwebs and stone fountains overflowing with red blood littered the entrance. Slowly stepping out from behind them were fiendish actors dressed in rotting suits of flesh and chains. They lumbered their way towards us with blackened eyes and outstretched arms. A cheeky blood-splattered sign near them read, "Beware of the dead. They'll much your ahead." The closer the actors got to us, the more details of their costumes I could admire. Their skin grafts were meticulously sewn into their bodies, mimicking an offshoot of some type of Frankenstein-styled undead. Their walking gait was stressed and without purpose. They simply stumbled their way towards us with their knees nearly clacking together with each step. The smell of rot and decay radiated off of the zombies like a miasmic fume. It was nearly overwhelming. The crowd of guests gasped and laughed at the actors as we were funneled in towards the now open entrance flap. The ghouls were nearly in reach of us when they were all lurched backwards. The sounds of chains loudly clanking together came from behind them. The metal bonds they were wrapped in grew taut as they were pulled away from the attendees. Stepping out from behind a large fountain lay a figure wearing a black robe and face covering. With both of their hands, they held onto multiple chains, keeping the freakish beasts away from us. There was something about the silent robed figure that left me more uneasy than the zombie-like men they were keeping at bay. With those figures now at our backs, we marched forward in a single file line. As the porcelain proceeded forward, I eventually saw the man that they called the ticket taker. He wore a tattered witch doctor-like outfit, complete with bones and shrunken heads that dangled off of his belt. His face was painted like a skull, and his bare chest was exposed underneath a tweed vest showing deep scars along with fresh, bloody lacerations alike. He jeered at each attending patron as he punched a hole through each one of their tickets. "Hurry, hurry, have your ticket ready, or I'll take your pretty, pretty little heady." He snickered to himself. The man showed off his pearly white teeth underneath his bone-white face paint. His teeth had glown unnaturally vividly in the dark crimson lights of the tent. I stuck behind Will, the only person I could even name in this strange place. Once he got inside, I was next in line. I had my golden ticket in hand. As soon as the ticket taker looked down at my entrance stub, his eyes grew wide and his grin twisted further, his face nearly splitting in two. "Well, looky, looky, we have a VIP. Oh, how that gives me such whimsical glee. Don't take another step with the other fleas. We'll take you to a wondrous place in this marquee." He snapped his fingers and looked over my shoulder. Emerging out of the dimly lit shadows behind me arose a massive figure dressed in the same black robes as the chain holder outside. Once again, their faces obscured. The witch doctor cupped his hands around his mouth and mouthed the word VIP to the large man. He immediately followed with that grimace and a mock, hanging using his hands as rope. In response, the mammoth of a man grabbed me by my shoulders and guided me up a tunnel in the tent that no one else had traveled down. The sounds of the screaming and laughing patrons dropped down to a light rumble and finally a deathly silence. The only noise coming from my own shallow breaths and the footsteps that lay under us. Even the light faded away into darkness so that the only sign of direction I had was the large hands pushing up against my back. After a brisk walk, the man stopped me in place and used his firm grip on my shoulders to keep me put. We had been walking in near darkness for a while, and I had quickly lost track of where I was. It wasn't until I heard ruffling from a thick fabric and saw the man pulling a tent flap away did any sort of recognition hit me. Just ahead of me was the interior of the big top, the main tent of the circus. I could hear the others flittering in from the other entrance. The distant sounds of chainsaws revving were quickly followed by screeching and hoots of laughter. The hulking figure watched me while I was frozen in place. He tilted his head as if confused as to why I was hesitant. His confusion quickly turned into force as he grabbed onto one of my shoulders and pushed me past the open tent flap. Realization quickly hit me. I was in a cage. Thick bars of iron surrounded me in a tiny little box near the top of the seating area. The only thing residing inside of the area besides me was a small carnival chair. I turned back towards the tent flap only to see the man closing a gate behind me and locking it with a padlock. I rushed back towards him and gripped onto the bars, pushing it with all of my weight. The padlock barely moved. Hey, let me out of here. Listen, I'm sorry. I don't think I'm the one who was supposed to be here. I found the ticket on my bed and decided to check the place out. I'm really sorry, just please. I don't want to be locked up here. The robed man watched me for a second before letting the tent flap fall down between us. I was completely closed off from everything but the stage. I prayed that this was all part of a regular show. The others were being frightened by actors dressed as bloody murderers and devilish phantoms, but none of them were actually being hurt. They were all being safely led to their seats by the other circus crew members who were all wearing those black robes. Though my heart was still gripped with anxiety, I took my seat anyway. A few other patrons sat next to my cage, eyeing me up and down as if I was just another attraction of the carnival. I tried to ignore them. Hey, so you got a special cage, huh? A familiar voice asked. I looked over to the seat next to mine. Just outside of the bars of my cage was Will. He grabbed onto the bars and tested out their strength before laughing. Well, I guess you'll be safe in there, he said with a smile on his lips. Just that little joke from a recognizable face calmed my nerves enough for me to relax. Yeah, I had a VIP ticket. I guess this is what happens to VIPs here, I said, awkwardly trying to laugh at myself. Well, at least we've got a good view. I know one of the... Before he could finish his last sentence, a third bell chimed. This one loud enough to feel like it pierced straight through our ear canals. It felt like a hot pin going through butter. I closed my eyes tightly in retaliation, only to open them and see nothing but darkness in front of me. I was worried the bell somehow not only deafened me, but blinded me as well. It wasn't until I heard the recognizable sound of fog machines blasting on the stage that my fears were downplayed. The stage lights slowly faded back into existence, revealing the main platform for the performers. It lay covered in a thick gray mist with a single oversized cauldron in the middle of it. The sounds of bubbling fluids emanated from the loudspeakers that covered every inch of the stadium. The crowd lay silent, except for a few scarce whispers that dotted around the circular seating surrounding the stage. Eventually, the sound of bubbling was interrupted by the sound of a piercing cat's meow. I strained my eyes in the dark lighting to make out a small black Bombay cat walking out from behind the stage. The rest of the audience's eyes followed soon. The little feline eventually made it to the front of the cauldron and sat down. A loud blast of smoke erupted from where it was and obscured the area completely. Loud sounds of haunting music blared forth onto us in the seats. As soon as the smoke dissipated, a hunched-over figure stood where the cat had been. She donned on a heavy-looking black robe with a pointed hood on top. Her face was cast in deep shadows. Heavy-looking bones, feathers, and lace draped over the elderly figure. It looked as though her attire had uncomfortably weighed down her already frail frame. To balance her weight, she carried a gnarled wooden staff in one of her hands. The crowd erupted in applause at the woman who had appeared on stage. She hobbled up closer to her cauldron. With each step she took, she slammed her staff down. This caused the sounds of her staff to echo off the stage floor. The crowd once more grew silent. With her free hand, she raised a long, bony finger to the crowd. Red overhead lights whirled around the stage as music and bubbling continued to echo out. "So you've decided to come," the old hag croaked out. Her voice was strained but powerful. It rasped outwards with endless decades of wisdom and experiences. I couldn't tell if the loudspeakers amplified her voice or if it was just her natural inflection. "You dare come to the Cirque de la Sorcière and bother me. What do you hope to accomplish by doing so? The only thing guaranteed here is your death." She laughed in a high-pitched cackle. Several audience members joined in with her. I myself tried avoiding this night, but the deathly cold seemed not deathly enough. Yet, as long as I am alive, I will give you a show to die for. Shall we get started then, my dearies? She placed both of her hands on her staff and jammed it into the cauldron. With big motions using her feeble arms, she began to stir the pot. The lights faded from red to green to match the color of the boiling fluid inside of the cauldron. Bubble, bubble, toil and trouble. Fire burn and skin shell shuffle. Eyes of man and tongue of devil. For a charm of powerful trouble. Like a hell broth boil and bubble. Turn me into the one most lovable. With that, the cauldron ignited into flames. Her very staff ignited with it like a torch. The witch cackled again, this time louder. Her voice became more vibrant and youthful by every second. Her very back straightened up more and more from her previously hunched over position. Before long, her croaking laugh sounded more like a beautiful serenade. With one quick thrust, she tossed off her heavy robes and revealed an enchanting beauty underneath. With skin like ivory and hair as black as night, she gestured towards the crowd that once again exploded in applause and whistles. She grinned as she twirled around on stage wearing nothing more than a revealing black studded leather corset and tattered leggings. Eventually she stopped dancing and looked directly up to me in my cage. Her icy blue eyes pierced deeply into mine with a recognition I couldn't understand. She winked at me before somersaulting backwards. Several other performers hopped onto the stage with Olympic-level bodies. Had it not been for their clammy skin, deadened eyes, and unsteady gait, they could have been expertly chiseled from marble. The woman in the black corset clapped her hands, and the show truly began. Loud bass-filled music surrounded the stage as various acrobats flung about, gripping onto poles and twirling with expertly honed talent. Their muscles ripped with every movement. The only mockery of a true acrobat they exhibited was their unsteady landings. Their bodies lurched forward with a supernatural bounce that could only be granted to the dead. Show after show followed a similar, unimaginable spectacle. Sword swallowers with open stomachs had engulfed their blades for us all to see. Fire breathers inhaled inwards to erupt their very eyes ablaze. And magicians made entire limbs of performers disappear during mid-acrobatic stunts, only to have them land safely back on their feet, their limbs completely reattached. Amazing sights and talents swept across the stage, showing only what the peak of the human body and mind can accomplish. The crowd was mesmerized, and so was I. All thoughts I had of this being some rinky-dink, back-alley show faded the instant I saw what was on that stage. Those performers were world-class entertainers and maintained their characters the whole way through. Some even lunged into the crowd and gnarled their teeth into the guests' horrified faces. Even the ticket taker eventually arrived on the stage to perform his special act of total body manipulation. With a charming smile, he walked towards the edge of the stage and squinted into the dark seating. He placed his hand on his forehead as a makeshift visor to keep the red glow out of his eyes. "Hey, piggy man with the flannel in the back row. Get up here. You left your tickets in your back pocket at the entrance instead of having them on hand. And what did that nice lady on the speaker say?" He chuckled at himself and waved the man forward. A balding, overweight guest hobbled his way towards the stage with a grin on his face and the crowd cheering him on. Even the ticket taker clapped his hands in support of the patron's cooperation. Once the man was on the stage, trying desperately to catch his breath, the witch doctor pulled out a little brown baggie from his satchel. He poured some glittery dust into the palm of his hand before blowing it into the patron's face. The overweight man nearly instantly drew a blank expression. He slowly rocked back and forth, absent-mindedly. The ticket taker waved his hands in front of the volunteer's face for some sort of reaction and received none. "You dum-dum, wasting all of our time out there." The witch doctor slapped the bald spot of the man's head. The noise echoed out and was quickly followed by a thunderous reaction from the crowd. Nearly everyone had laughed. "Now's the time for the real fun," the doctor said. "Mr. Jonathan, it turns out you've been a dog this whole time. Show us what a good dog you are." With that, the overweight man dropped down to all fours and left his tongue dangling out of his mouth. He gave a loud yip when the ticket taker scratched behind his ear. "Oh, Mr. Jonathan, I was wrong. You're no dog. You're a dancer. Show us a good dance." With that, the man hopped back up to his feet and began to waltz effortlessly by himself along the stage. The crowd was in uproarious applause. No, Mr. Jonathan. You're a contortionist. Show us your act." The man immediately stopped his dancing and reached over to both of his shoulder blades. Without a second of thought, the man wiped his arms behind his body. Two loud pops echoed out from the stage. The audience gasped at what they had just seen. The man's arms dangled unnaturally down at his sides as he began flailing around. Blood quickly pooled at his dislocated shoulders, forming a deep purple bruise. Whispers quickly spread around, asking if the guest was a performer or not. This quickly answered itself when a woman sitting next to the man's open seat stood up and ran towards the stage. She cried out towards her husband. "What the hell did you do to him? Stop this!" The ticket taker walked over to the edge of the stage and squatted down towards the woman. His smile faded and he extended a hand down to her. "Come, join us up here and you'll see how much your husband loves you." The woman looked at the outstretched hand, clearly unsure but ultimately taking it. The witch doctor hoisted her onto the stage. "Mr. Jonathan, stop performing. Tell your wife what you did after work on the 14th of this month." The mindless man blankly looked over to his wife and began to speak. "I slept with one of my students in exchange to give her a better grade." The crowd gasped, and the wife brought her hands up to her face in shock. Was this your first time, Mr. Jonathan? The witch doctor asked while wrapping his hands around the woman's shoulders in mocking comfort. No, a few students every year. And do you plan on stopping, Mr. Jonathan? No. With that, the ticket taker whispered something into the woman's ear and pulled a blade from his vest. Your choice, my darling dear. Are you angry he did it, or are you angry he didn't wait for you? You're a wreck yourself, and you know that. With that, the woman took the blade and gritted her teeth. She charged forward, screaming at her husband with a death-curdling screech. She drove the dagger deep into his chest. After the first thrust, the lights once again turned off. The sounds of sloshing and thrusting were the only things echoing off of the flaps of the tent. When the lights came back on, there was no one on the stage except for the ticket taker, who had clapped his hands loudly together and waved for the audience to join in. They did. His showmanship lured them all into believing it was all a part of the show. At that moment, I thought so too. I looked over to Will, who seemed uncomfortable, but I couldn't tell from what. He seemed to be lost in his own thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for that wonderfully devilish act of heartbreak and revenge, the beautiful young witch called out while appearing on stage. She gently clapped her small hands together and sauntered to the center of the stage. Her small frame emanated with it an immense presence. The witch doctor turned to face her and bowed. She curtsied in return. With a quick grin and quicker twist, he hopped off of the stage. Our last event for the night is approaching, so I ask everyone to remain horrified. I need your blood full of that wonderful adrenaline for just a bit longer. I've got one last deed to do, which, of course, is what every good witch does. Summon the beasts of hell. With that, several of the robed men entered into the big top carrying a large circular pillar. Each step they took was heavy enough to shake the foundation of the circus. The woman patiently waited as they lurched the pillar upright on the stage to form a large, black stone circle. Here's the part you've all been waiting for. A glimpse into your eternity and a helpful hand to get you there. In a most expedient manner, of course. That helpful hand is, of course, mine. The woman giggled, as did most of the guests. Her charm was dazzling, and she captivated both the men and the women inside of the tent. First, I need my book. Let's see where I left it. She rested her finger on her chin for a moment. Eventually, she rolled her brilliant blue eyes over and slapped her forehead in her own personal disappointment. Oh, dumb little me. It's been here the whole time. With a quick flourish of her hand, a book bound in darkened leather appeared between her fingers. Next up would be to find the right spell. Where could it be? She opened up her book to a random page, and a shriek from dozens of voices echoed out from its pages. She quickly slammed her book shut. Nope, definitely not that one. Let's try again. A few guests laughed, while others were entranced by the performance. With another random jab, she opened up her book again. This time the pages lit on fire, covering her porcelain face in flickering shadows. Once more, she slammed the book shut, smothering out the flames. Oh, that one was close. It must be somewhere around there. With more care, she placed the book further away from her face and squinted down at the pages. As she flicked through the parchment, her face was cast in various different vibrant colors. Finally, her face lit up on its own with a genuine smile. Here we go. How to summon beasts from the pits of hell to deal with nasty little earthling cretins who attended a circus in the woods mysteriously after committing a heinous act of debauchery. The woman gasped as if out of breath. Oh, dearie me. I really do need to come up with better names for my spells. Oh, well. This little witch is a bit too old to change her habits now. With another flick of her wrist, her staff appeared in her free hand. The tip of it still lit aflame. You know, the thing about spells is that they only really work if people believe in them. So may I please have my wonderful helpers disrobe? The black-robed stewards that had been assisting in stage work all night had all turned to face someone individually in the crowd. Clearly each one was drawn to a specific patron. With a determined pace, they walked right up to their guest. No one stood in front of my cage, yet I looked upon the crowd with equal levels of curiosity. With a slow movement, the attendants lowered their hoods and took off their masks. There was a second of silence before the crowd cried out in unison. Their voices were desperate and unintelligible. "No," I heard from next to my cell. I turned my head and saw Will with his hands gripped tightly into his seat. He looked over to the servant in front of him and saw a ghostly visage of a woman. Her face was contorted in pain and surprise as if in her final death throes. "Sarah, no, you don't understand. I had to do it. It was for our kids and you knew. We needed that money. The insurance was the only way to get it." A frightened look plastered itself on Will's face. The look of torment that can only come from being caught red-handed doing something truly ungodly. The stewards all placed their books back up and turned back to face the stage. They ignored the pleas of everyone in the crowd. Several guests reached out and grabbed the figures in front of them, but none of the helpers paid them any attention. They merely stood by silently, watching the final show. The woman stood in front of the stone gate with her book in one hand and her staff in the other. She slowly slid down to her knees and began chanting, her body heaving with every word. The heat inside of the tent intensified. She chanted something. With each breath she took came a chill through the air. It cut and bit its way through the seats. More chanting. Several people within the crowd tried to stand up from their seats, yet their robed attendants held them down with a stony grip. Will merely cried into his hands, begging his Sarah to look at him. More chanting. The swirl of hot and cold air swept through the tent like a tunnel, the crowd's hair twirling in the strong gusts. Disembodied voices carried their way into my ears, and I quickly covered them with my hands. Yet no matter how hard I squeezed, I still heard everything. After a few minutes, the wind flow returned to normal. Silence filled the tent. I glanced up, not sure what to expect. The stone pillar remained on stage untouched. No portal to be seen, nor visage to watch. The other guests turned to look around in confusion themselves, but that's when the first robed figure turned back around. A scream sounded off from across the big top, quick, shrill, and snuffed out almost immediately. Then came another, and another. One by one, a chorus of screams had danced their way over the stands. The robed figures turned to their partners and lurched forward onto them. They dug their sharpened fingers deep into the patron's flesh, pinning them to their seats. Whole chunks of their flesh and sinew were ripped out of their bodies. They were shoving mouthful after mouthful into their mouths. Some joined in with the others, tormenting those still alive. My eyes darted over to a moving figure in the corner of my eye. Sarah had begun to turn around. Will dug his back into his chair with a horrified expression on his face. He could scarcely repeat the word no over and over again. But this time when Sarah removed her mask, it was no longer the face of a woman. Instead, a dark, snarling shadow had consumed the frail face of the girl from earlier. The only sight left to be seen was the glow of bleached white teeth emanating from the gaping hole in her mouth. She lunged on top of Will, digging her teeth deeply into his neck. Blood splattered its way across my body, with each of his pulsating heartbeats. The shadow figure chewed and swallowed chunk after chunk of her visceral meal. She grunted and moaned with each bite. With a loud bang, something to my other side slammed into my iron walls. I looked over to see a bloodied black-robed shadow trying to force its way towards me. It reached its arms outwards towards my face and only missed me by inches. Before I could process what was happening, I heard another loud thud, and then another. More and more arms shot their way through the iron bars of my small little sanctum. With their own main courses being finished, they desperately were searching for dessert. By the time I heard the last scream and gasp from the audience, all I could see in front of me was a sea of white, blood-speckled teeth and torn, fluttering cloth. It was like swimming in a darkened ocean and seeing nothing but dozens of predators encircling you from every direction. I couldn't do anything but sit there. A single wrong move would have me grabbed and pulled towards the edge. Even if their heads couldn't reach me, their twisted, sharp fingers could. My vision started to fade as my heart rate started to peak. My head found itself dipping back and forth. I looked up at my last moment of consciousness to see a familiar set of dazzling blue eyes standing amongst the sea of shadows. "I'm glad you came to the show," a sweet voice called out before my mind simply faded away. Before I knew it, I had awoken up in a hospital. The nurses told me I was struck by a car after my shift. I had been unconscious for a few days, but healed miraculously well. I asked them if they saw anything unusual. A cat, a woman, anything that might have explained what I just went through. They told me no. Everything had been completely and utterly normal. Within a few days, I was fully cleared and allowed to be discharged. I convinced myself that it was just a dream. That was easy. I simply tried to save a cat and got hit by a car. Everything after that was just a weird hallucination. What I saw couldn't possibly have actually happened. Besides, people in comas often have weird experiences, right? But when I put on my clothes to leave the hospital that final night, I felt something in my rear pocket. I reached my hand inside and felt a little piece of paper. I pulled it out and saw a golden ticket with a hole punched through it. A small little note was scribbled on the back that simply read, "Thank you for the warm night." I can't believe how sick of peanut butter cups I am. And no matter how many times I try, the page never loads when I try to post this. But maybe someday it will post, and I honestly just need somewhere to talk about this nightmare. Even if this somehow made it to someone out there, I don't know what anyone could even do to help us, but here's to trying. My name is Aurora, and I'm 22 years old. I'm from Bancroft, Ontario. We all are. There are 4 of us here. Myself and my 3 best friends. Leah, Charlotte, and Rose. We've been best friends since high school, living in this adorable little one-horse town. We used to spend our summers finding gemstones in the creek and roasting in front of evening campfires. It feels like a different lifetime, one I'm not sure we could ever return to. It started with a simple sleepover. We had tried to do monthly sleepovers, though with work we sometimes had to settle for bi-monthly, or quarter-annually, gatherings instead. It was October 30th, 2019. Leah was hosting, and we all wore our slapdash costumes and brought copious amounts of wine and Halloween candy. As I stored my 2 bottles of rosé in the fridge, Rose came up beside me. She clutched her own bottle and grinned at me. This was our first monthly sleepover in about 3 months. I'm so excited for tonight. I've needed this so badly. I smiled back earnestly and felt the anticipation welling in my own stomach. We both filled our glasses and returned to the living room to find Leah and Charlotte chatting excitedly. My attention was drawn to a beige and black box with distinctive insignia on it. I cocked an eyebrow. Leah saw me and smiled coyly, grasping the box with two manicured hands. She stroked its edges, drumming her fingers with a satisfying rap on the lid, her eyes playfully alight. I see you've noticed the Ouija board. Care for a little game? Leah and Charlotte giggled. Where did you even get that? Rose questioned, eyeing the box curiously. She sat down next to Leah, glass in hand. The three of them were quite the sight. Leah with her bleached blonde hair and last-minute Playboy bunny costume. Really just some rabbit ears and a silky nightgown. Rose with her black cat costume. Cat ears and a tight black dress. And Charlotte dressed as a witch. Essentially the same as Rose, but with a hat instead of ears. All three cuddled together, clutching their wine glasses and poring over a Ouija board. I half expected a mass murderer to pop through the door and stab us all to death. We really were like something out of a Halloween movie. I smoothed my cheerleading costume, my actual cheerleading uniform from high school, and sat down in front of the coffee table. I got it from Amazon. Brand new. Completely uncursed. Leah replied to Rose. Don't you need silver or something to put on it to be safe? Charlotte piped up, living up to her costume. Rose pointed to her and nodded her head in agreement. Those are the rules, she added. Leah rolled her eyes slightly and smiled. Well, I wear gold. Does anyone else have silver? Charlotte perked up. I do have this new ring I just got. It's set in silver. She held up her hand to show a beautiful, almost glowing green gem seated in a thick silver band. It shone with an unearthly glow that mesmerized me. I took a deep sip of my wine, ogling the gorgeous jewel as I did. What kind of stone is that? Rose asked, seeming as mesmerized as I was. Charlotte beamed, evidently proud of her purchase and our response. It's called Moldavite, and it's fucking expensive. But it's so worth it. It came from literal space. The way it caught the light, it seemed to cast glimmers of emerald light onto Charlotte's skin. She removed it from her finger and placed it on the Ouija board. Glancing at the box, I could tell it truly was brand new. The corners were crisp, and the glossy coating was almost completely bereft of fingerprints and scuffs. So do we play the Ouija board to get scared for the movie, or do we watch the movie to get scared for the Ouija board? Leah took a long swig of her red wine to finish the two glass, and refilled it from a bottle at her feet. She drummed on the box's lid expectantly, looking around to all of us. I shrugged, eyeing my own rapidly emptying glass. Maybe we should do the board before the movie, so we don't let the wine interfere with our Ouija capabilities. Rose suggested. I considered the four of us, wind up and sloshing over the board together. I nodded. Sounds fair, but I want to top up first. Charlotte popped up and raised her own empty glass. Same. The two of us went to the kitchen and retrieved our wine from the fridge. That ring really is beautiful. Charlotte smiled happily as she poured her glass. Thank you. I love it. They say it brings about great changes. I remembered her exclamation about the cost, imagining a similar ring on my own finger. So, how much was it? Charlotte grimaced a little at the question, and I knew it was a lot. She opened the fridge and replaced her bottle. A lot. Like $260 for that little ring. A lot. I choked a little on my wine and had to pause the conversation while I settled a coughing fit. That's a lot. I agreed, flustered at the idea of wearing that much money on a little ring. I saw it in a gem shop outside of town and I couldn't walk away from it. It completely entranced me. Honestly, I could understand. It was mesmerizing. I thought of the unearthly green glow it gave off under the light. We returned to the living room to find Rose and Leah had set up the board already. The ring placed just above the sprawl of numbers across the top of the board. Leah lit a candle to set the moon. We all placed our fingertips on the planchette and took a deep breath. There was a pause. A kind of long pause, actually. Our eyes collectively shifted over to Leah, who let out a breathy laugh. Oh yeah, I guess I have to ask something. We all chuckled, and Charlotte took that as her cue to take the lead, once again living up to her costume. Is there anyone with us here tonight? She asked in a cool, mysterious voice. Nothing happened for another long moment before I felt Leah tugging the planchette towards yes. I raised an eyebrow and shot her a jokingly accusatory glance. She sent me an equally playful look back, and Charlotte continued. Welcome then, Spirit. Thank you for joining us tonight. Ooh, Rose cooed playfully, feigning fear. Charlotte pressed on. What should we call you, Spirit? The planchette started moving almost before Charlotte had finished the question. S-A-V-I-O-R. My brow furrowed and I looked quizzically between the others. Why Savior? Charlotte looked equally curious why that word had been collectively chosen. Okay, does that mean you're here to help us? The planchette moved quickly towards yes. Aw, it's a friendly ghost. Thanks, Ghosty, Rose said sweetly, thoroughly with the wine at this point. What have you come to help us with? Charlotte continued. The planchette remained still for another long moment. So long I wondered if it was my turn to move it and spook everyone. But then it very slowly began to move again. L-I-V-E. The message wasn't that spooky, but the hairs on my arms rose up and a chill ran down my spine. Are you a familiar spirit to us? The planchette moved to no. Are you an angel? I could tell she was really getting into the whole witchy seance vibe. The planchette moved away from and back towards no. Are you a demon? She followed. The planchette did the same thing again. She looked a little relieved, but thoroughly confused. What are you then, Savior? The planchette moved so rapidly I had to focus hard to process what it was spelling out. The candle Leah had lit was flickering wildly. C-O-L-L-E-C-T-O-R. What, like Pokemon cards or something? Rose said, a little slurred. We all shared a giggle, but we also all shared a similar look of uncertainty as we tried to understand the meaning of the response. This was the point that it dawned on me that we were all confused. No one had been pulling a prank or playing around, or else they were doing a great job acting their part. The mood of the room began to shift from playful to uncertain. As if to end the silence, Charlotte continued asking questions. She tried to start a new line of questioning. How old are you, Savior? The planchette moved across all the numbers and back again, never settling on any one, tugging at our trembling fingertips the whole way. The candle sputtered loudly and the ring seemed ethereally lit. I began to feel mildly nauseous. The planchette moved back to the letters, beginning to spell something else out. P-E-R-F-E-C-T-S-P-E-C-I-M-E-N-S. Perfect specimens. My blood ran cold. Leah pulled her hands off of the planchette and rose from the couch. What the fuck was that? She said in a shaking voice. Charlotte was pale and hadn't taken her eyes off the board. Aurora, was it you? Rose asked in a small voice. I shook my head, feeling the color drain out of my face. Stupid games. I tried to say casually, but my voice faltered. I want my money back for that stupid frickin'... Leah withdrew her phone from her pocket and began tapping away on the screen. Her brow furrowed and the tapping became more and more frantic. She finally threw her phone onto the floor with a thud and flopped back onto the couch. I have no service now. She sounded outright afraid. No attempt to hide it at all. A panic was rapidly building. I'm not sure what compelled me to do it, but I rose and pulled back the dark blue curtains that hung over the window behind the couch. Peering out, I saw nothing. Not like normal backyard, no big deal, nothing. Like nothing. No yard, no light, not even stars. Only black. Nothing. My head felt like it was spinning as Leah pushed me out of the way to look outside for herself. What the... Her voice was high and tight with panic. Charlotte, what did you do? She let out a harsh screech that made us all jump. Me? Charlotte shot back. You got that stupid fucking board. The two of them started arguing back and forth as Rose shrank helplessly into the couch, her face blank and staring. I put my hand over hers and we both sat, catatonic, as Charlotte and Leah bickered until they ran out of steam. That first night, we tried every door and window, just to find that they were all sealed and blacked out. We fell asleep well after what should have been dawn, and the windows never lightened. When I woke up the second day, Leah and Rose were already awake and cooking breakfast. It seemed so normal, and I wondered if last night had been a horrible dream. Hey, I said awkwardly. They both smiled, but their eyes didn't show it. Last night had been real. This was just a show. We're making eggs, Rose said, trying to sound chipper, but just sounding tired. The first couple of weeks we tried hard to feel normal, to keep our spirits up and find a way out of the apartment. Nobody touched the board. We hid it under the couch well out of sight, but never quite out of mind. None of us spoke of it. Charlotte had left her ring in the box and hadn't put it back on since. We figured out by the second week in the apartment that the food replenished itself weekly, as did the soap, toilet paper, and our clean clothes. Though we had to wear Leah's clothes, as all the rest of us had were our costumes. We had exactly the food and drink that we had when we started the party, which meant we actually had quite a lot of food, and so much damn candy. Also, enough wine to sedate all of us pretty thoroughly at least once or twice a week. By the fourth week, though, our candy bowls and snack spreads felt monotonous and sickly sweet, and there was never truly enough wine to keep us as numb as we all wanted to be after 4 weeks stranded in this tiny space. The first fight broke out between Leah and Charlotte, still tense from that first night. Leah drank the last of Charlotte's wine a full 3 days before reset, and Charlotte got so mad that she slapped Leah in the face. There was a lot of quiet days after that one, but as the weeks went by, the fights got a lot more frequent. After a few months, I stopped even counting the days. Every day was the same, waking up in this cramped apartment, eating the same crappy junk food, wearing the same clothes, sleeping in the same sleeping bag on the same floor, over and over again. Rose kept track, reminding us the day before each reset that a week had gone by. We realized early on that we never had any less food, but we also never got any more. If we ran out of anything before the reset, we were just out of it until then. One morning, Rose was exceptionally quiet. She had never fully recovered from the first night. She had been quiet since then, but this morning she wouldn't even make eye contact. It's been a year today, she finally said, looking at the floor. We all looked at her in silence, and Charlotte and I met glances. She looked concerned. Wow, I can't believe it. But Leah cut her off with a loud fist on the coffee table. She rose from her established daytime spot on the couch like a storm cloud and glared at Rose. Thanks. I was really worried I'd missed that anniversary. With that, she stormed off and slammed the door to her bedroom. Rose didn't speak, even in response for the rest of the day. It's like Charlotte knew, because she tried so hard to get something out of her, but it was no use. Something had snapped inside Rose. The next morning, I woke to Charlotte sobbing. I followed the pained cries to the bathroom, and that's where I found Rose hanging from the shower curtain rod by a strip of torn bed sheet, and Charlotte crumpled into a quivering ball by her feet. A flutter of panic rose in my stomach at the sight, and I raced to Rose, fumbling with the knot around her neck. I could tell by the coolness of her flesh and the color of her face that we were far too late. Leah didn't come out of her room after we told her, not even to eat. I heard her pained cries every night for 3 days. I took over calendar duties in Rose's absence. There wasn't even anywhere to take Rose's body, so when we finally cut her down, we had no choice but to hide her under a sheet in the bathtub. But then the day of the reset, I awoke in my normal spot on the floor and had no choice but to violently shake Charlotte awake to check my eyesight. Sleeping peacefully on the couch, in her original spot, was Rose. She had been reset. Understandably, we had a very teary reunion. Leah finally came out of her room. She apologized to Rose. Rose apologized for killing herself. And for a few weeks, there was relative peace and harmony in the apartment. Rose enlightened us that she not only remembered everything from before she died, but she remembered killing herself. "I don't think I'd do hanging again," she remarked. This taught us something. We can't really die here. By the 18th month in captivity, we would pretty regularly off ourselves when the apartment became too much to handle. It didn't even seem to matter because we always got reset the next week. Sometimes it was the only conceivable way to make it to the next week. The big problem was when we started to get violent with each other. After a year and a half stranded together with the same food, clothes, and surroundings, privacy had become a distant memory. And I guess this is why one day I woke up to Leah straddling my chest, both her knees pinning my wrist to the floor. She had a pillow in her hands. Still groggy, I struggled weakly and tried to shake the sleep from my head. That's when I caught a glimpse of Rose on the couch. Eyes open, glossed over, mouth agape. Dead. I barely made out Leah's rushed apology before the pillow came down over my face. I admit, I didn't like asphyxiation. I didn't like most of the ways I died in the apartment, but I get why it was Rose's least favorite. When I reset, Leah seemed perfectly content and greeted me like nothing had happened. She just stirred a coffee as I gaped at her in disbelief. "What the fuck, Leah?" She let out a long, dramatic sigh and lowered her coffee mug, shooting me a, "I guess we're going to talk about this" look. "Look, I'm sorry. I just needed some time to myself." Rage boiled up in my stomach. "So off yourself like the rest of us do and reset yourself for a week. Why would you?" She cut me off. "We both know it isn't the same. It's nothing when until you reset. It's been so long since I had some peace and quiet. I just needed a frickin' bath, okay?" I had no clue how to respond. Charlotte and Rose had woken up while we were talking, and were also staring daggers at Leah. We didn't discuss it further. We just noted that this was now an option. To my deepest shock, the next time I woke up dying, it was Rose's hands. Over the next few months, all peace and friendship faded away. We began to resent each other. Not surprising, since we kept killing and being killed by each other. But there was no real physical consequences for murder here. They always came back. Like the wine, or the peanut butter cups, or the clean clothes, or the eggs. Every week they reset. Except our memories kept growing and feeding a resentment for each other that poisoned all our interactions. It became an unspoken rule that disputes could be ended by murder. Private time could be acquired by murder. More food and booze could be acquired by murder. So it's kind of just become a tool we use in here to get things we want. So the other day, I decided that finally tonight would be my turn. By my calculations, we've been here for just about 2 years now. I want a fucking bath in the quiet these people always talk about after annihilations. Leah says it's like you're the only thing in the universe, but I've only killed for extra food and once or twice to sleep in Leah's bed, so I've never experienced it. So tonight, I'll kill them all. So last night I stabbed them all. Tomorrow is reset, so I have one day all by myself. They were right. It really is like I'm the only thing in the universe. The quiet is unbelievable. It almost makes up for all the blood and the faint smell of decay setting in that's starting to permeate the house already. Even with my growing resentment, these girls were still my best friends since high school. Every time I killed them, and vice versa, it always felt a little wrong. I know this probably doesn't make sense unless you've been in this situation, and there's no way you've been through this. So, I guess only the girls could possibly understand. But they'll be back tomorrow, and tonight I can enjoy my grossly earned private time. My head aches so much from all that wine last night. And my stomach aches for another reason. I must have miscalculated the date. Reset must be tomorrow because they haven't come back. They're still... I miscalculated. I'll try to enjoy a bonus day of privacy, but my ears are ringing and a knot is growing in my gut. I found a makeshift calendar that Rose was hiding in her stuff. I know I said I'd try to relax today, but I had to be sure I was wrong about the date. And I wasn't. Today is reset day. My heart raced so hard I thought I might faint, and I swallowed hard to keep the bile rising up my throat at bay. Quivering, I withdrew the Ouija board from its hiding spot under the couch. Charlotte's ring gleamed a sickly green at me as I opened the box. The board set up, ring in place, and my shaking hands on the planchette. I reached out to Xavier. "Where are they?" I asked. My voice quivering as tears blurred my vision and began to roll down my cheeks. I felt the planchette pull my fingers with no delay. Like they had been waiting for me. I blinked away the tears and watched the planchette move across the board. F-R-E-E. Then it moved to goodbye and fell completely still. Edit. After I used the board, my phone exploded with notifications. I checked and this posted. So I decided to check behind the curtains for the first time in... I don't know, probably months. And I saw a fucking sunrise. I could see someone wearing a medical mask and walking a dog on the sidewalk, and they haven't reset yet. Oh God. What have I done? Scratching. That's what I heard when I was laying in bed at night. I sat upwards in bed, straining my ear to where it was coming from. The sound came again at my door. I quickly grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight. The scratching continued. I huffed out, knowing what it was. "Gus, you better stop. I'm not letting you in," I whisper shouted, knowing it was my cat. There was a small scratch sound before it went silent. I rolled my eyes, laying back down and falling asleep. There it was again. That scratching noise. I quickly sat up, checking my phone, and seeing that an hour had passed. Cursing, I went to the door and stopped. I had my hand on the doorknob but didn't open it. There was another noise, though. Breathing, almost like it was muffled. Strange, I thought, slowly turning the knob. I opened the door. Nobody was there, not even my cat. I quickly shut the door, heart dropping. Maybe it was Gus and he just quickly ran away when I opened the door. I tried to calm myself, going back to bed. Halfway to my bed, the scratching was back. I stopped cold in my tracks as I silently stood there. I heard a faint noise. That breathing sound was also back. It didn't sound like an animal breathing, more like a human. I shook as I stood there frozen. It got louder and louder before stopping again. Sighing, I slowly turned back towards my bed. That was when the scratching started back again. I quickly snapped my head towards the door, my phone light flashing at the bottom of the door. A shadow was there. I could see it underneath the door. In a flash, the shadow quickly receded, along with the scratching. My heart thudded against my chest. Without thinking, I grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. Nothing. No one. Not even a single soul was outside my door. My eyes traveled down to the floor, where there was a small, long object lying there. I brought my phone light down, shining it on the object. It was my cat Gus's front leg. I almost threw up as I slammed my door shut and pressed my back against it. I let out a choked sob as tears threatened to spill. Who could have done this? Was there someone in my house? Or was it just my family playing a horrible trick on me? How could they make a replica of Gus's leg that accurate? I knew that was Gus's leg on the floor. The top half of his leg was a light orange color and the bottom half was black. I knew what my cat looked like. Well, all of these thoughts and questions raced around my mind. I didn't notice the scratching sound was back. I backed away from the door, tears running down my face. Suddenly, the scratching turned into banging, almost like someone was punching the door. This only lasted a few seconds before it was quiet altogether. The silence was almost deafening as I stood there in the middle of my room, shaking violently. Then, my bedroom door began to slowly open.